This is the Stephen Mansfield Podcast.
Welcome to the Stephen Mansfield Podcast, the podcast where we look at our times through the lens of faith and leadership, character, and history. It's great to have you with me. I'm Stephen Mansfield. Let's go. One of the things I enjoy, one of the things that has helped me in understanding history and major events and what's going on in the world, as well as how to live my life personally, is the connection between big public truths and private truth, is the connection between the way a man ought to conduct himself, the way a woman ought to conduct herself, the principles, the morals, the truths, and how those translate onto the international stage when they're ramped up to policies and ramped up to philosophy. For example, the word economics just means house law, oikonomos in Greek, the laws for running a house. So the way that a man or a woman runs their home economically, financially, save the money, buy the groceries, pay the rent, whatever, how to budget, how to make smart investments, just the normal stuff about buying, using coupons, all that kind of thing. That is the basic law. Those are the basic principles of economics. Savings and interests and investment and building wealth and what to do with wealth and taxation. All of that at the micro level applies then at the macro level. And I enjoy understanding both. And I like the fact that the word economics, a field that I study a great deal and got a lot of background in, is basically comes out of a home, comes out of the management of what, we used to use checkbooks, our credit cards now, our accounting, our, what we do with our accounting software on our laptops. All of that is very related to what's going on in macroeconomics, economics that run the world, run nations, run corporations. It's the same thing often with strategy at an international level, strategy in war, and strategy for an individual. One of the guys that I really admire is a man named Karl von Clausewitz. He wrote a book called On War. He was a Prussian and then a Russian military officer and also a strategist. He's read in all the great academies around the world. And his book On War is extremely valuable. And I actually use it sometimes, not because I teach military affairs at West Point or something like that, not at all, but because the principles in it that apply to successful warfare are also true for an individual. So, for example, Clausewitz would say that the object of war, as with all creative activity, listen to this now, is the employment of the available means for the predetermined end. Clausewitz would say that when you go to war, your focus should be on the end. What state do you want ultimately? And then you walk that back. You work backwards from there to decide how you're going to conduct the war. Okay? A good personal example is I might have a fight with my wife. We rarely do, thank God. But let's say that I have a moment of tension, an argument, a fight with my wife, and let's say I win it. Okay, not that we think that way much in marriage, but let's say I win the argument. But what I really want is a peaceful, happy, romantic, hot marriage. I don't really want to win that battle. I want to win my wife's heart. I want to have a happy marriage. I want to have a happy woman living a happy life with me. So it's possible for me to think that the goal is to win a short-term battle, in this case an argument, and ultimately lose the state that I actually wanted as the final state, what Clausewitz calls the predetermined state. Now, I think this is important for us to hang on to, and I like the idea that in economics, in military strategy, there are principles that apply just as much to an individual's life as to the life of nations. It helps us simplify a bit. It helps us to see things through a moral lens. It helps us to lead. It helps us to think. And this brings us now to the peace talks happening between the United States and Iran. Because it's very clear that we have gone into a very destructive military operation without what Clausewitz would call the predetermined end in mind. We have not thought about what is our ultimate state. And one of the reasons I enjoy watching international affairs is that, again, those principles come home and apply to everything from how the 16-year-old leads his life to how I lead my life to how communities should lead, etc. In other words, these principles are spiritual, they're universal, they are eternal. They are applicable in many, many different ways. They have a multifaceted application. Now, let's go back to Iran. When we go to war, when we go into an armed conflict, a lot of the mojo, a lot of the focus, especially on the street in America, is towards victory. Let's win this thing. Let's beat the Kaiser. Let's beat Hitler. Let's beat the Viet Cong. Let's beat the Russians. And in this case, let's beat the Iranians. Well, I bring up the idea that just winning a war, or in a smaller sense, winning a battle, is not enough. It's not really what you want, right? We didn't want to really only win the war with Iran. In fact, we could have won it had we decided to win it. Instead, what we want is a certain state on the other side of armed conflict. When armed conflict ends, what do you want the situation to be? What are you ultimately working for? And often what happens is we get a very short-term view where we want to win a battle or we want to win a war, but we don't think about the long-term perspective of what do we ultimately want? What did we want in Europe after Hitler was dead? What did we want in Vietnam after the Viet Cong were defeated? If we had thought that way, we would have conducted ourselves differently, at least in the situation of Vietnam. So now we find ourselves in a season of peace negotiations. There has been a ceasefire agreed to, and now there are going to be about 60 days of negotiations. But it's very, very obvious, because we're negotiating the way that we are, that we are going to insist on no regime change. I would have suggested before the war began that if we were going to go in and bomb Iran and do as much damage as we were attempting to do and remove Hezbollah, and remove the other terrorist organizations that Iran sponsors, Iran being the biggest supporter of terrorism and bloodshed of any nation in the world currently, with Russia coming up a close second in Ukraine. I would have said that we wanted regime change. We wanted this old octogenarian, extremist Shiite bunch of leaders who have caused unbelievable pain in the world in the last 47 years and are brutalizing their own people. Tens of thousands of their people murdered just because they protested in the streets because of inflation and prices and bad government. My point being that we would have insisted on regime change. We didn't think in those terms. We just thought in terms of getting them subdued militarily. We didn't think absolutely we should engage in regime change. And of course we should have. Also, a great deal of the tension with Iran was over the Strait of Hormuz, because about 20% of the world's petroleum and trade passes through the Strait of Hormuz, which is, if you look at a map, you'll see how the Strait of Hormuz has to go around Iran. Any ships going through there almost has to go around Iranian territory. They control it. So their ability to shut down petroleum, their ability to shut down trade, their ability to take captive foreign vessels, all were part of the issue. But no, we have left those negotiations till now. Absolutely no change has occurred. And it's very possible that we're going to return to exactly the status before the war happened, which is that Iran is charging tolls for ships to pass through the Straits of Hormuz, controlling it militarily. No change. The straits were open before the war. They're going to be open after the war. And Iran is going to be enriched. That's something we should have worked against. One of the things we're very concerned about is an Iranian nuclear program, which means we have to pay attention to the enrichment of uranium and plutonium. No agreements about that. Our big concern, of course, is that Iran, which is devoted to the destruction of Israel, will drop a bomb on Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and kill millions of people and attempt to wipe out the state of Israel. And by the way, they have the kind of weapons that can also reach the United States, can reach Europe, etc. And this version of Islam, not all Islam, but the version of Islam that dominates the leadership in Iran, is basically a death cult. They believe they're meant to cause chaos. They believe they're meant to sacrifice themselves. They believe that they are meant to engender world chaos so that the Mahdi returns. This is their version of the Messiah, although quite different, of course, from the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And then, of course, we've already committed, or at least loosely promised, $300 billion to rebuild Iran. What sense does this make? So my point is not just to kick Donald Trump during these negotiations. My point is to say we've got to become a people who are more strategic. We've got to play 3D chess when everybody else is playing checkers or just regular chess. We've got to be able to think. We're a superpower. We're smart. We have genius generals. We have a phenomenal Secretary of State. We have unbelievably gifted people. We have to be strategic, and we have not been in Iran. And if we go forward the way we're currently going forward, and we negotiate a deal, and we return the straits to Iran, and we leave this octogenarian Shiite extremist bunch in charge, and we pay to have their country rebuilt, none of this makes, and by the way, especially if we leave a nuclear program in place, none of this makes any sense. I should say also on the nuclear program front that there are nuclear facilities for Iran in other countries, like Pakistan, which is supposedly an ally of the United States. We're just going to have to get smart. We're going to have to be more strategic. We're going to have to get greater alignment. We've got to stop acting like drama and theater is reality. So I urge you to consider this. What is strategic for an individual, those same principles have got to govern international affairs. What is economic for an individual, those same principles have got to govern in international affairs. That the words even mean the same thing. Economics, house law. What's happening in Iran now is at this point shaping up to be an absolute embarrassment. It's not too late. We're still negotiating. But there's no reason not to have progressive regime change. There's no reason not to have a new arrangements for the Strait of Hormuz. There's no reason not to forbid or destroy enriched uranium and plutonium. There's no reason not to make the restructuring of Iran a global cause economically and not something that the United States should do alone. We've got things to take care of in our country, from infrastructure to poor to pitiful schools, etc., etc., etc. And in this, our 250th year as a nation, we got to be smarter. We got to be wiser. If we do what we're heading towards doing now with Iran, we will be diminished on the world stage. And that's more diminishment, by the way, than we've already endured in recent years. We've got to be smart. We've got to have the end game in mind. We don't just want to win the argument with the wife and lose the wife. We want to win the ultimate condition we desire. And what we ultimately want is an Iran that is thriving, that is prosperous, that is free, that is connected to the nations of the world, that is no longer an extremist regime sponsoring terrorism around the world. That is a minimum. Americans have died. Treasure has been lost. There's a greater victory to win than just to say we bombed the hell out of them and now we're going to spend a lot of money to rebuild them, which is essentially what the Trump administration is saying. Now, I happen to know that a lot of people in the Trump administration don't agree with this peace plan, but it's where we're heading. It's where we're heading rapidly. And we've got to rethink this. What's strategic for you is strategic in the world. You think about the ultimate end state. You think about what you want ultimately, not just a short-term battle, not just a short-term purchase, not just a short-term correction. You want the ultimate state, what Clausewitz called the predetermined state. What do we want in Iran? Work for that, not just raise the flag, declare victory, and get the heck out and write a great big check. That's going to create an ever more unstable world.
Stephen Mann Mansfield is a New York Times best-selling author, a popular speaker, and a frequent faith and culture commentator in international media. His groundbreaking books on faith and society include The Faith of George W. Bush, The Search for God in Guinness, Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, and Lincoln's Battle with God. Learn more at stephenmansfield.tv.